Tom, otherwise known as the UTXO Slayer. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah.
Honored to be one of the first guests on your podcast.
Yeah, man. Number two, we just grabbed some breakfast at the Driscoll Hotel, which is, I think, one of the oldest hotels here in Austin. And we were just discussing how this year has been one of the most beneficial, one of the best years that you've had, you were describing to me.
Yeah, it's been one of my favorite years of my life. Joining Unchained Capital as an employee, really just getting into the Bitcoin space and meeting a lot of people, making a lot of friends. Yeah, I was telling you that Bitcoin is something that has really, improved my life this year, despite the price, being pretty bad this year, which I think just speaks to how powerful this technology really is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I would remark the same, moving to Austin, joining Unchained Capital, being able to grow our friendship, but also working with each other somewhat indirectly has been a great experience. And being able to also outside of Unchained, just here in Austin, doing some bow and arrow, some archery, going to the beef initiative events that we've gone to see Texas Slim, eating a lot of steak and barbecue. And yeah, just doing other stuff as well, having great conversations. But yeah, man, I wanted to just get a little bit of your background, what you've been doing at Unchained, because you're working alongside a small team with Phil and Tyler and Carl. And what you're doing, in my opinion, for the company is super important, but it also requires a lot of intelligence, patience, being calm. It's pretty interesting and great to watch you guys perform with our clients when it comes to what Unchained has to offer in certain scenarios that these clients get into. So I'd love to hear maybe just a little bit of the background of your position, the team that you work for at Unchained, and maybe give an example of why collaborative custody is so important from maybe like an anecdote from a specific client.
Sure, yeah. So I'm on the concierge team at Unchained Capital. My official position is a technical director on the concierge team. And we have quite a few different roles that we play. Primarily, we do concierge onboardings.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is that people that want to set up a Bitcoin multi-signature vault, which is one of Unchained's primary products, us, the onboarding team, we get on a Zoom call with people from around the country, even outside the country in some cases. And we spend an hour, sometimes longer, just really from a very basic level, getting people set up to hold their own keys to their own Bitcoin so that it is essentially self-custody. It's also collaborative custody because the structure is that each client holds two of their own keys, and then Unchained as a company holds one key. Two keys are always required to move Bitcoin, so that's why Unchained can't move people's Bitcoin around all by ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and the client has full control over that. But yeah, we teach people how to set up the keys, how to build the vault, how to move Bitcoin around. Sometimes, sending transactions with a lot of Bitcoin from a custodian or an exchange into self-custody. And that is really important because, conveniently, we have an example from just this past week where one of the biggest exchanges in the world, FTX, pretty much went down, and it looks like people that had money sitting there in Bitcoin might not be able to get it back. When you hold your own keys to your own Bitcoin, then as long as those keys aren't stolen or compromised somehow, then you are completely set up. Like no one can take your Bitcoin from you. So that's what we help with. And I also do a lot of kind of technical support. Like if people that have already have vaults with us and they have questions, something doesn't make sense, they need a walkthrough or something. I do a lot of that as well.
Nice. Yeah. UTXO consolidation specifically as well.
Yeah, managing UTXOs, which is a complicated portion of Bitcoin that we can get into maybe a little bit later. But
I've personally observed a few of the many different client scenarios where they have been, some of their hardware devices. So there's 4 elements total. They've got their 2 devices and then the seed phrase to each one. And so they have the ability, well, they don't want to do this, but they could lose hypothetically 3 of the 4 elements. And we could assist them with recovering, the other elements by essentially backing up, sending them new devices, signing to sweeping their funds into a new vault. It's pretty incredible. I've seen this happen actually prior to moving to Austin. We had one specific client who stored, they stored their hardware device and the seed phrase pertaining to that hardware device in an actual physical safe in their house. And that was stolen. And they were running a business, so they had a business account. So their other partner had the other key and the other seed phrase. But essentially, if you're only using one device, single sig, he would have been screwed. He would have lost everything. But what we were able to do is proceed with like security verifications to make sure, we were doing our due diligence. But then we overnight shipped a device to him to be able to get that initiated onto his Unchained account. And then once the other business partner was able to co-sign, they swept their funds into a new vault after Unchained co-signed and assisted. And that was the first time I've ever seen Unchained in action, like Unchained's utility. And I was like, wow, this is the real deal. Because I looked at our website and I knew that this was something special, but seeing it in real life, talking to the clients and seeing it like actually happen live was remarkable. It was great. It was really cool.
Yeah. So multisig, a big reason for that, as you were mentioning, it removes all single points of failure from your system. So you can lose a piece or multiple pieces, which you don't want to do. But if it happens, most likely you will still have the other pieces that you need to recover your Bitcoin. You pointed out that there's like 4 pieces that you have to keep track of. You have 2 devices, 2 sets of backup words. And as you mentioned, you can lose 3 of them and just have 1 left, because if you have that 1 piece left, you essentially have 1 of your keys. You can combine that with the key that Unchained Capital holds as a backup to recover your Bitcoin. And what does a recovery look like? Essentially, you're just building a new vault or a new treasure chest, which is an example I like to use for vaults. You're just building a new treasure chest and putting a new set of keys together, moving your Bitcoin into that one so that you have all the pieces again.
Yeah. It's magic. It's magical. Especially with everything happening with FTX this week, specifically for me and my team in the loans department, was pretty hectic. Not something that we haven't dealt with before, but we're working pretty long hours to be able to help clients with their loans. And I was pretty thankful to have helped a good friend of mine, family members, get their Bitcoin off of BlockFi. I have, unfortunately, one friend that I think might be stuck here because I think BlockFi is pausing withdrawals. We've got other exchanges that have been pausing withdrawals. And so it's really, you are not taking control of the UTXOs, you're not taking control over your Bitcoin, BlockFi essentially has the keys to those. And so many people are used to, prior to Bitcoin, coming into our society, they're used to just having a bank account, having a bank app nowadays, and just having all the responsibility in place for the banks. And they're doing that with Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And unfortunately, it's moments like this FTX situation where they learn through pain. They lose a lot of funds. They're losing a lot of money that they're investing sparingly, because we're in a high inflationary environment as it stands now. And so it's really unfortunate to see that happen, because people are, when money dies, I haven't read the book yet, but when you're in an hyperinflationary environment, people begin to gamble more. They begin to try the Powerball. They try different methods of allocating their money to make the best buck, to make more money, to keep up with that rate of inflation. And so, yeah, I mean, it's been interesting to observe on Twitter. And yeah, hopefully, my personal contact, I wish them the best of luck. I hope they're able to get out of that. But
yeah, and a point that you made just a minute ago that I think is really important to highlight is the difference between Bitcoin and the dollar system, where a lot of people just hold dollars at a bank. The difference being that if you hold your dollars at a bank, most likely that bank is FDIC insured.
mm-hmm.
And so if something happens to that bank, the government is basically, by law, they should be making good on your dollars. And if your government doesn't have the dollars, well, they should, but they could just print more.
Right.
And that's the difference, right? Bitcoin, there's only 21 million Bitcoin. No more can be printed to reimburse you if your custodian loses your Bitcoin. So all you have is an IOU when you're keeping your Bitcoin at these exchanges. That's why you need to take your Bitcoin into self-custody. That's really the only way to secure it for the long term.
Yeah, well said. I mean, that's something actually I've been bringing up to a few people. Actually, the woman in front of us this morning when we were waiting in line to get our breakfast, she was asking about where I work, and I was explaining it. And I was telling her, it's like, if, something unfortunate happens with your bank account, and there's a wire that went to the wrong place and whatnot, your bank has FDIC insurance, and there's little to no cost whatsoever for central banks, the Federal Reserve, to print money. They can just out of thin air. So yeah, unlike Bitcoin, they have the capability of potentially recovering from a detrimental situation in the fiat traditional banking system. So yeah, it's really important to provide education, because there is no Bitcoin customer service. There is no Bitcoin head of education or any board. It's just this.
We're sort of trying to be that.
Yeah.
But not natively.
Yeah. And I saw a mixture of optimistic over the long term. Most of the people I follow on Twitter and hearing from them, over the long term, there's an optimistic look towards Bitcoin, but it does seem to be conflated with other cryptocurrencies. And that is the most common point of discussion that I have with people that I will meet, certain acquaintances that I have. And I think that's where maybe we could kind of chime in here. You created a fantastic 5-part video on YouTube. It's called The Fundamental Value of Bitcoin. You can also just watch it all in one sweep, but it's fantastic. Great job, by the way.
Thank you.
You edited the whole thing, right? And produced it?
Yeah, it was a solo project. My mostly just inspired by talking to friends and family who don't quite get Bitcoin to the extent that I do just yet. And I really just wanted to have something to provide to people that ask me about Bitcoin who are curious, and just kind of lay out from the ground level everything that I think you need to know to get to a point to at least realize why Bitcoin is an important technology, and you should probably have just a little bit for your own financial protection. Doesn't even have to be a lot. And if you can just get to that point and take that little bit of Bitcoin into self-custody so that a custodian doesn't lose it, so you'll still have that Bitcoin years from now when you really might need it. That's what I'm trying to help people with.
Yeah, I think I remember you saying that the intent of making this was to really be able to hand this off. And especially the fact that you created it yourself, I think family members and friends will really respect that. They'll be able to say, he cares. He deeply cares about letting people know and informing people on why this is really important to learn. And yeah, I mean, it's Bitcoin is definitely a form of insurance. And I also think that, looking at the Bitcoin Standard, the book, the first 7 chapters have really, it's more focused on the history of money, and it's not really even focused on Bitcoin until chapters 8, 9, and 10. And so I think that's a really important thing to highlight with people that are curious and they don't know much about this, is that it's pretty crucial to understand Bitcoin, but more importantly, to understand the history of money and what money is, and understanding the utility of money. And when you get familiar with the properties of different money being as a technology and what properties can maybe cause degradation of the quality of society versus maybe other properties can enhance longevity, I think people will wake up to the fact that this is really important. It's very important, and it trickles out to so many different parts of society, our food industry, our healthcare, health insurance. We've had Crowd Health and the Meat Mafia podcast, come into our spaces here at the Bitcoin Commons, and they're fighting also by utilizing Bitcoin and also education on the current status of our food industry and the healthcare industry. But they're also implementing Bitcoin as this tool. So it's really an exciting time. I'm glad that I'm, myself and you and a few others we're pretty young to be able to sit by and watch this live. We're onboarding this new monetary system, and we get to watch it every single day. It's pretty damn cool.
Yeah, we're right on the cutting edge of a new financial system that is exciting for a lot of reasons, but it's also necessary because the current system is falling apart at the seams, and some people don't notice that yet, but it is happening, and it's happening rapidly. And yeah, like you mentioned just a minute ago, really the place to start is really just thinking about what is money. The Bitcoin Standard starts out that way in the book. My presentation starts out that way. That's the first chapter. And then the other chapters kind of just get into so once you know what money is, how do you start evaluating different forms of money so that you can say that one form is better than another? And then, towards the end, I do talk about what separates Bitcoin from other cryptocurrencies, like you were talking about just a little bit ago. There are 10,000 plus cryptocurrencies. I'm pretty sure anybody could create a cryptocurrency if they wanted to. So what makes Bitcoin special? Quite a few things, and we might get into that.
Oh yeah, we're getting into it. And I'll definitely link this YouTube video in the show notes of my podcast. I'm excited to really. When I was looking at your graphics, your tables of comparing, I think you've got 7 or 8 properties. So fungibility, durability, all of those properties that we'll discuss. Being able to have those and go through different, different types of tools that could potentially be used as money and comparing it to crappy forms and then also superior forms and showing with a grading of, A plus to an F was very helpful. And then you described within each property, which I believe is in chapter 2. So we'll jump to that in a little bit. But that was very helpful for me, seeing that visual, and then talking through each property and understanding why, Bitcoin overall has better grades within these fundamental properties of money. But yeah, so chapter 1, you called it defining money, and you started off asking what is money and what makes it valuable. And then after that, you proceeded with kind of like a history of the dollar. So the Coinage Act of 1792.
Yeah.
So
I'd love to go over that.
Let's get into that.
Yeah. So if you're going to try to define money, interestingly, that's something that a lot of people struggle doing, even though money is something that all of us use almost every day. So we all have an idea in our heads of how to use money, but in terms of what exactly money is, I do challenge people to try to define it without looking it up, and you might find that it's hard to come up with a good definition. The way that I approach it is, first, let's just look at what is the most popular money on planet Earth, and today that is the US dollar. Obviously, the United States is a small portion of the globe, but we have tremendous financial power, and the US dollar is the global reserve currency. So what is a dollar? Well, if I hold up a dollar in my hand, it's just a piece of paper. And I could also hold up a $100 bill in my hand too. That's also a piece of paper. They both are about the same size, probably exactly the same size, and also they are the same weight. So the question becomes, what makes the $100 bill like 100 times more valuable than the $1 bill? Like it has the number 100 written on it, but where is that value actually stored if they're both just pieces of paper that are effectively physically the same, right? The ink on the $100 bill is not like that much more valuable than the $1 bill. The paper isn't special. So what's going on there? To answer that question, you need to look at the history of the dollar. So as you're mentioning, the Coinage Act of, I guess it was 1792, that's where the dollar was officially created by law. And it defined $10 as essentially being 16 ounces of gold. 16 grams of gold. And if that's true, then now you have a clear picture of where that value actually is. Because what a $10 bill is you can take it to a bank and you can exchange it for those 16 grams of gold. And if you have a $100 bill, you can get 160 grams of gold. If you have a $1 bill, you'll get 1.6 grams of gold. So it becomes very clear, where the value is stored actually. But now that's not the way things work anymore. Your dollars are not an IOU for gold anymore. We're just kind of using them with no backing whatsoever. So what happened between 1792 and now? That's the story that I get into in the video. So essentially, $10 was equal to 16 grams of gold for actually quite a while after 1792. But we saw a big change in 1933. So what is that, 150 years later or so? At that point, Franklin Roosevelt was president, and you had the Great Depression underway, which kicked off in about 1929, right? And FDR said that your gold or your dollars are no longer redeemable for gold. And the reason for that was he was concerned that people hoarding gold was contributing to the Great Depression.
So that was Executive Order 6102, right? That's where he started to implement and demand for society to give back their gold to the U.S. government.
Yeah, not only could you not redeem your dollars for gold like you should be able to, it was illegal to even possess gold. So they were trying to confiscate people's gold. Some people managed to effectively hide their gold, but that was the law that came into place. And it was an executive order, which is important to point out. This was just something that the president decided to do. There wasn't really a Congress vote on this. It just happened. And then going forward a bit, after Great Depression, we hit World War II. And after the war, the major countries of the world, Europe and the West, we needed to financially rebuild. And so there was, in 1944, we had the Bretton Woods Agreement. It was a meeting of all these different countries.
That was after World War I, right?
World War II.
World War II, yes, sorry.
Yeah. And Bretton Woods, part of the agreement was that we were going to tie dollars back to gold, but at a new exchange rate. So now it was $35 was 1 troy ounce of gold. And effectively, that's the same as $10 now being equal to about 8 or 9 grams of gold.
So just chopped it in half.
Compared. Exactly. Yeah, it was 16 before, now it's 8 or 9. So if you're someone that was holding dollars and taking dollars seriously as an IOU for gold, your IOU just got cut in half, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
And why did they cut it in half? Well, when you are trying to win a war by any means necessary, and you need money to fund that war, but you don't have enough gold, well, you just start printing paper and saying that, this is still the same value as this other paper that's connected to gold, even though this is not connected to gold. So yeah, that created an issue. That $35 per troy ounce exchange rate as well, that didn't apply to regular folks like me or you, because it was still illegal to possess gold at this time. So the only people that could actually exchange their dollars into gold were central banks of other countries. So France or England or something. If they were holding dollars, they could arrange with the U.S. government to convert their dollars into gold. Moving forward a little bit more, we hit 1971, a very important year for people.
What the fuck happened?
Yeah. 1971 is really where it goes off the rails, because France actually decided that they wanted to make use of that arrangement where they can convert their dollars at $35 per troy ounce. So they wanted to ship a bunch of their dollars that they were holding back to the United States, and they also sent over a ship to collect the gold and bring it back to France. 1971 was, right after the Korean War and in the midst, I believe, of the Vietnam War, or right after. And the United States, again, because we wanted to win these wars by any means necessary, we were printing dollars out of thin air. And so we did not have the dollars to backed by gold. And so we basically just told France, no, you can't exchange your dollars back for gold. And this was called the Nixon shock. This was President Nixon got on TV and announced to the world that, quote unquote, temporarily, you could no longer exchange dollars for gold at that exchange rate. And it's been 51 years since then. So I don't know what he meant by temporary, but
Well, Bitcoin's around the corner, so I think that's what he meant.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to put a pin on that, I thought I heard from some source that the Vietnam War was completely funded through credit.
Wouldn't surprise me.
That was the first, I think it was the first war where it was entirely just out of us being able to print money. I'm not sure if I'm correct on that though.
I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
I mean, really just when it comes down to war, this is physical force. This is like, you win or you die, or you lose all your power. And so countries in that position are always incentivized to print paper and try to trick people to get more spending power so that they don't lose the war.
Yeah. And I mentioned this when Jose was on the podcast, a website called What the Fuck Happened in 1971. And it's just a huge list of graphs and charts that show GDP. What else do they show on that? I think it's just like economic growth and different measurements and how
wealth inequality, divorce rate, incarceration rate. You can see just on all of these graphs, price of fruit, price of all these different essential goods. You can see that something weird happens in 1971.
Yeah, it's a clear indication that when this huge decision to alter our money system, it had repercussions that no one would realize. The fact that you just said divorce rates is crazy to me. And I think that is due to having a cheap means, or maybe even almost, artificial means of making money. Society maybe just becomes the proof of work within the individual, and businesses, I guess, is deterred. But yeah, I mean,
I would say probably one of the biggest things is wealth inequality. And then from there, it spirals into these other things. That's just my take on it. But wealth inequality, this is what's called the Cantillon effect.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have a special group in society that's allowed to print money, basically they get to decide where that money goes first, and then it just kind of trickles outwards, but not in a fair way. So,
hey, have you ever heard of the Nancy Pelosi stock portfolio tracker?
I have, yes.
This is a modern example of the Cantillon effect.
Right. Yeah. So people in power closest to that money printer, they have the biggest advantage from money being printed, and then everyone else basically has their money slowly stolen from them. This is just it's a way to siphon money from the poor to the rich continually over time.
And some people might be confused as to, well, how are they stealing? Because they're not really taking it out of my bank account. But that's typically what you're describing there is just due to inflation and the cost of living.
Exactly. So inflation is commonly referred to as the invisible tax, because you can just print money and there's not like a tax that you're really seeing when you're filling out your tax forms each year. But your dollars that you're trying to save up are just, their purchasing power continues to decline. So your wealth is also declining. And where is it going? It's going to whoever's receiving that new money that's being printed, which in often cases is the government or these too big to fail corporations. And so, yeah, it's just a racket.
Yeah, and the too big to fail corporations, essentially, if we had a sound form of money, they would fail. They would have to adapt in a manner that is conducted via human intelligence and actual critical thinking and devising new business operations or technologies and tools. Whereas right now, it's just, let's just bail them out. Let's finance them more. And this is the financialization of the U.S. economy and other economies. A lot of people in this space within our Bitcoin community have listened on Bitcoin Audible, but also read Bitcoin is the great Definancialization by Parker Lewis. That's, I think, one of his most popular blogs of, I mean, out of the, he's posted about 15. And it's really interesting to read when he describes how savings was just a simple act of storing wealth aside. And now I kind of highlighted this in the first podcast, where like savings is equivalent to investing nowadays. So,
yeah, like a lot of people have the question, so if I can't save in dollars because of this printing problem, how do I save money, right? And going back to that story of the dollar, we know that it was originally backed by gold. What is the reason for that? Is gold a superior way to store wealth and store your savings for the long term? The answer is yes, because it's much harder to create new gold. In fact, you're not really creating any new gold. There's a specific amount of gold on planet Earth. You can't really produce more of it, but you can mine more of it out of the ground. But it's hard to do. So the gold supply increases at about 1% to 2% per year, and that's really reliable. There's no government that can just come in and print more gold and really devalue your savings quickly. Now, gold is still not perfect in that regard, because there's a lot more gold in outer space. There's some gold in the oceans that we're probably going to be able to have technology to scoop that gold out of the ocean. And so that 1% to 2% range might not stay constant as it has for so long, just going into the future with this new technology. But yeah, that's where the presentation starts to head next, is why gold? Why not other things? Why dollars? Why were these tools chosen to be money?
Yeah. And there's one of the last quotes in chapter 1 of your video series that I really enjoyed. It's a nice reminder. I think I've heard it before, but for people that aren't in this industry, in this space, don't have this particular amount of knowledge, this quote really hit me pretty hard. Is money is a tool or technology used to store and transport human energy across time and space. And going back to you in the beginning of the video asking, what is your definition? Normally people don't say that. They just say, well, it's just something that helps me buy stuff and barter maybe. But that's a really cool definition, to store and transport human energy across time and space efficiently, compared to, before different types of monies, there was just barter of different products or services that people specialized in. But that wasn't efficient. You couldn't sell, 200 pairs of shoes for a whole house. Like that was not something that was a feasible trade-off. So getting into the second chapter, which is called Bad Monies and Better Monies, I think that gets into what makes a money better or worse, and that dives into the desirable properties. Want to get into that?
I'd love to. Yeah. Basically, if you're looking at money as a tool, then what makes one tool better than another tool? And at the beginning of that chapter, I took the example of a hammer, which is like the most commonly thought of tool. So if you want to know what makes one tool better than another, it's really just how useful is that tool to you? Does the tool have the right properties, the desirable properties that you need for a job? For money, the job is acting as a store of human energy that you can send and receive with others. But for a hammer, obviously, it's to drive a nail into something.
I think also, just to highlight, like, some people might question, what do you mean by human energy? Well, that's, you performed some type of service that, whether it's smelting, or back in the, like the medieval ages, but you're performing some type of service that is giving, in exchange for money. And so that is, essentially it's passed energy that you have expended in order to, receive that money.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you expend your energy to receive money, and then with that money, you can then give it to others so that they will expend their work for you, whether it's a service or producing a product. Um, Money really gives you the power to kind of have other people expend their energy how you want. You can just go up to someone on the street and say, I'll give you $100 if you jump up and down 3 times, and they'll probably do it, which is kind of a wild thought, but that's the reality. That's what money is. As far as like looking at money as a tool and looking at hammers as a tool, I point out that hammers, there are many ways to make a worse hammer than the hammer that you have at home. So, you can come up with almost an infinite list of ways to make a worse hammer. You could construct it out of cheap plastic so that it breaks when you try to hit a nail with it. You could make it really slippery so that it flies out of your hand. You could make it really long or really short so that it's awkward to hold. There are many different ways to make a worse hammer, but there are not many ways to make a better hammer, right? If there was a way to make a better hammer, then that's what we would see at the store when you go to buy a hammer. Basically, the ideal hammer already exists. We have it. We know what it looks like. It has the properties that make it the most useful for the job. So then the question becomes, what are the properties that the ideal money would have? If money is a tool as well, what qualities should that money have to be the best tool? And so now we're going to get into those properties. There's some people categorize these properties differently. So some people might use a list of 6 properties. Some people might use a list of 9. For my presentation, I used a list of 8 properties. And so, yeah, we can go through those real quick.
Yeah. So I've got the list here. Fungibility, durability, portability, transferability, divisibility, uncontrollability, or like censorship resistant, supply stability, and then also demand stability.
Yeah.
You could take us through all those if you'd like.
Yeah.
And then I would love to hear, what is the major difference of portability and transferability? Because I feel like that could confuse people, because it does seem like it's very, very similar.
Right. Yeah.
But if you want to run through each one and then you can talk about that. Yeah.
I'd love to. So fungibility also is the one that I think a lot of people have questions about just because they're not familiar with the word fungible. But fungibility, all it means is kind of interchangeability. So a money is fungible if I can exchange my 15 units of that money for your 15 units of that money, and there's no change to our wealth because each unit was created equally. And so, like your $1 and my $1 are worth the same amount. So that is an important quality of money. The second one is durability. So if you are using money, you don't want it to be accidentally destroyed somehow, right? You don't want to work for your money and then it just crumbles in your hand once you receive it. It should last for years and it shouldn't be easily damaged if you're going to be moving it around. So that's another very desirable property that you'd want for your money. Portability is really just, how easy can you move it across space? So if you are far away and I wanted to send you money, it's a lot easier to send you dollars or Bitcoin than it is gold, because gold is very heavy. It would take a long time to get to you. It would need to be secured. So some things are definitely more portable than others. And ideally, you want your money to be very portable. Transferability. So the difference there is that transferability is ignoring physical distance. It's just like if you and I were in a room together, how easy is it for me to transfer possession and ownership of money from me to you. So you kind of within this property, some people might also say recognizability is sort of an aspect of this, where you should be able to recognize that what I'm handing you is legitimate money. So with dollars, right, they have a lot of special text on there and pictures so that you know it is a dollar.
Okay, so could you exchange this word for verifiability?
Yeah, verify. Yeah, so that not only do you want it to be recognizable, but you also want it to be verifiable in its authenticity.
Mhm.
Correct.
Okay. Great.
And then moving on, we've got divisibility. So that's an important one too, right? If you have a money that's not very divisible, then it's going to be much harder to pay for smaller items. And then also if like you need divisibility so that you can receive change back, right? If I give you $100, but I'm only trying to buy something worth $6, then I want $94 back. So divisibility is also important. Uncontrollability. If I were redoing the presentation, I might actually phrase that as neutrality, but that is also a desirable property for your money, right? You don't want your money to be subject to someone else's control. You don't want, like in China is a example where money is highly controlled. If you misbehave, they can essentially turn off your money, say that it's not valid anymore. And then, you also want to be able to check the balance of your money and have it be accurate, and someone can't just add more, subtract less on a whim, which is kind of how dollars are trending in that direction too, of being more and more controllable, especially as they become more digital. This risk of CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, they have more of this control aspect to them versus cash, because if you just have an account of online dollars and there is a central power that's controlling that, they can potentially just say, we don't like what you said, your money's no longer valid, or you can't spend it here, but you can spend it over here. We want to direct your behavior.
I briefly mentioned this in the last podcast too. I think this is it's extremely important to highlight and to demonstrate that this is coming. So I've been in the Bitcoin space for about 2 years now, and when I first started, CBDCs were deemed a conspiracy theory. It was categorized into that, at least. Yeah. And here we are. We have the new UK Prime Minister who already announced it. But it's also it's been prevalent in China, as you just mentioned.
Yeah, I think it's not even a secret that the United States Federal Reserve is intending on creating a CBDC.
Yeah. Jerome Powell, I think, has publicly stated it.
Right.
So, yeah, for people that don't fully grasp that, your ability to exchange money for a service, for supporting a local business, paying for your kids' education, for groceries. There are moments where if you say something wrong, I don't have a specific resource or something that I could highlight that's occurred, but I'm pretty confident it has happened in China, where if someone speaks out against the Chinese Communist Party, their bank account could be shut off. I mean, this happened. Actually, I do have a resource that I almost said Canada's trucker convoy that spanned for almost a month, I think.
Yeah, it was a while.
It was this huge protest that was not aired that much, but through the power of social media of individuals, they were able to, film that and portray it to the public. And that lasted for a long time. And it portrayed people protesting, and it was shut out, or eventually it was shut down by the Canadian federal government by shutting their bank accounts off. I even observed and witnessed a coffee shop that was supporting them. Obviously, it's super cold in Canada or at least when this occurred, it was the winter season, I believe. And coffee shops were helping out these truckers, and even those coffee shops were financially censored. And that's not right. That's absolutely unacceptable.
Yeah, it's like a lot of people use China as the go-to example for this, but it's a lot closer to home. I mean, it happened in Canada.
Yeah, the fact that it happened in Canada was pretty shocking to me. It was shocking to some of my family members, and definitely within our friends and colleagues here in Austin, because Canada has always been our freedom-loving neighbor for the past, I don't know, few decades. And so having this centralized digital currency that is proposing the complete eradication of physical cash, it's cutting off our ability to transact privately too. It's also a huge thing on privacy, and that's a big concern. That's a really big concern. And so Bitcoin, as it develops and infrastructure is built, the Lightning Network, Layer 2, more privacy tools, this will be a digital form of cash that can sustain these freedoms, these abilities for us to be able to act and be private and not have everything surveilled, because privacy is a fundamental right, and you shouldn't have to have everything be tracked by any government. It's just unnecessary. Obviously, there's concerns for terrorist activities where there have been these, alphabet symbol agencies that have, they're essentially surveillance agencies that watch different financial transactions that maybe, yes, they probably have helped with terrorist activities, actual terrorist activities, but there's a balance to that, in my opinion.
Yeah, uncontrollability is a very desirable thing, and that is a big innovation of Bitcoin, being able to have digital property that also isn't centralized, and so it can't be controlled. That has not existed before Bitcoin was created in 2009 or 2008, so it's a big one. We'll get into a little bit more about how these properties apply to each of these forms of money. But I guess I don't want to forget to mention that if you keep your Bitcoin at an exchange, then it can be controlled.
Yeah.
So take self-custody of your Bitcoin. So we've gone through 6 of the 8 properties so far. Supply stability is an extremely important one for number 7. So that goes back to what we were talking about earlier in the conversation, where if money can be easily created, then that's bad for your savings, right? It's going to devalue your savings. So dollars, when they were backed by gold, had much better supply stability. Gold has pretty good supply stability. But a lot of things don't. If you started to use flowers as money, then people could simply grow more of them, and it wouldn't work out. So supply stability is huge. The last property out of the 8 in my list is demand stability. So this one's kind of interesting. You could also phrase it as acceptability. So you want your money to be acceptable, right? You want... If I have money and I want to pay someone, I want them to accept that as money. This 8th property, though, is kind of special, I think, because basically it relies on the previous 7. So if your form of money doesn't really score well on these previous 7, then it's probably going to be less acceptable. And then also, if your money does score very well in these previous properties, then it should be pretty acceptable. So you do want a money to have high demand and not low demand, which should occur naturally if it does the other jobs of that money should do. Demand stability is a big reason for why Bitcoin's price is so volatile. So Bitcoin has a 21 million supply limit. So the supply stability is second to none. But the demand stability is very all over the place because most people that trade Bitcoin don't understand it. They don't understand these properties of money. They don't understand what makes Bitcoin special. They're just trying to buy and sell Bitcoin for dollars to try to make a profit. And so you just have very highly fluctuating prices up and down. I expect the volatility to decrease over time because more and more people will adopt Bitcoin. And but yeah, that's maybe down the road a ways. I think what I'd like to do next is kind of just talk about like gold and dollars in the context of these properties.
Yeah, so just like explaining the visualization of the tables that you had in the. You want to do that? Yeah, sure.
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, I think the best way to go about this is just, again, go through all 8, but kind of just look at how they apply to gold and dollars. And I'm focusing on gold and dollars because gold has been historically the most popular money from the natural world. And for the last many decades, dollars have been the most popular form of basically man-made money, paper money. Mm-hmm. So first of all, fungibility, that's that interchangeable one, right? Both dollars and gold are pretty good at fungibility, right? If I have an ounce of gold and you have an ounce of gold and we swap our ounces, we still have the same amount of gold and we should be okay with that trade. Same thing with dollars, obviously. So there's not really a problem there. Durability, gold is highly durable. In fact, more durable than a lot of other metals because it doesn't really chemically react with other things. It can be hit with a sledgehammer and it's not going to shatter. It's just going to maybe its shape will be molded in a different way, but you'll still have the same amount of gold. Dollars are not as durable, right? You can light a piece of paper on fire, you can rip it, but most people use dollars digitally. They use debit cards. Their dollars are essentially insured by the government, so durability is not too much of an issue for dollars either. Portability, that's where you have a problem with gold. So it's hard to send a lot of gold to a faraway place, and especially in an economy, a world economy where you need money moving around all over the place all the time. Gold is not an ideal solution for that. Of course, you could create an IOU for gold, but then that's what the dollar was, mm-hmm. right? It doesn't work out in the long term. Dollars were largely a way to fix the portability of gold. So dollars are very portable. You can easily send stacks of $100 bills, or you can send them digitally. So that's a big advantage to paper money over gold. Transferability, both dollars and gold are also pretty transferable. So if I try to pay you in gold, then there are cheap tools that you can use to kind of verify the authenticity of that gold, and you can recognize that it is gold. Same thing with dollars. So as we're going through this, so far, gold and dollars are scoring pretty well. Gold, not so much on the portability side, but still, like, these are big main contenders in the world of the best monetary tool in the universe, and that's why they are so popular. Fifth on the list, going to divisibility. Dollars are very divisible, right? You have dollars, you have cents. There's no real issue of trying to, like, very rarely do you need to get more exact than a penny, right? Gold, there's another problem there. Gold is not as divisible. If you have a 1 ounce gold coin, it's pretty small and it's worth a lot. So it's worth like $1,600. So if you wanted to go to the grocery store and pay in gold and get change back, that's not gonna happen. you can't really cut gold perfectly. Big reason.
Is that, I think you mentioned in the video that that's why silver was introduced.
So yeah, silver was popularly used alongside gold as money for that reason, that it was essentially you'd use silver for small purchases and gold for larger purchases. The drawback to silver, why we just didn't use silver instead of gold, is that it was easier to produce silver than gold, and also silver is even less portable than gold if you want to like move a lot of value. So yeah, that's divisibility. Going on to uncontrollability. Gold is quite uncontrollable. If I have gold, especially if I hide it, there's not much anybody can do about that. Even Executive Order 6102, when they tried to confiscate people's gold, that was a really hard law to enforce. And a lot of people did manage to continue to acquire gold and sell gold essentially on a black market, and possess gold for years without getting caught. Dollars, as we alluded to earlier, when you're using cash, they're not that controllable because it's hard to enforce any monitoring of that. But in digital form, which is the direction that we're headed, they are more controllable, definitely.
Yeah, I've seen multiple examples when I was living in Boston, and this just occurred in other jurisdictions in the United States. But I went to a Starbucks and they just stated, they had a sign that said, "We do not have the exact amount of change," and it wasn't even just quarters and dimes. It was like $1 bills, and I was like, "What? You don't?"
Yeah,
and I think that's on purpose, potentially, to incentivize people to just use credit cards or debit cards or apps, right, and to kind of get people in the mindset and mental model that digital currencies will be primarily and solely used in the future.
Yeah, the pandemic pushed us that way too, where a lot of people
QR codes introduced in the pandemic, it seemed to really erupt. And
yeah, a lot of people just also wanted to use contactless payments, right? They didn't want to hold $1 and then receive $1 someone else was holding because they were worried that germs would spread that way.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that really we were already trending that way, but that was a big boost. Supply stability, kind of been talking about this earlier, but yeah, gold scores pretty well, but it's not perfect when it comes to supply stability because we will keep finding more gold and acquiring it. But dollars should score the same as gold if they were the original dollars, where they were actually backed 1-to-1 with gold, or at least with a set exchange rate. But ever since 1971, or you could even argue 1933, dollars supply stability would score almost the lowest score you could get because the Federal Reserve can just continually print trillions. For demand stability, because gold and dollars score pretty well on these earlier 7 properties, they also score pretty well for demand stability. So both of them are quite acceptable. And if someone said that they want you to do something and they'll give you either dollars or gold for it, probably dollars would score higher for most people, but both of them are widely desirable. So if you just break down really all of those properties for both gold and dollars, what are the conclusions? The conclusions are that gold really suffers in 2 places: portability and divisibility. So both of those are major problems with gold, and they were a big reason why we moved to paper currency to try to fix that, because paper currency really does fix portability and divisibility. But once you move over to dollars now, or paper money, now you have issues with other properties, specifically uncontrollability, because there is some sort of issuer of that paper, and also supply stability, because that issuer tends to abuse their power and create more than they should, especially to win wars or something like that.
Would it also be durability for dollars as well?
Yeah.
Not as bad, but
Yeah, it's not as bad. I think for most people, you don't have to worry too much about your durability, but because we're moving digital, so that's there are advantages. There's reasons why we're moving towards digital dollars. There's durability. It's even more portable, potentially even more transferable. So yeah, there's reasons why we're moving towards digital dollars, but there's also trade-offs, especially for uncontrollability.
Yeah, and so these trade-offs are specifically highlighted in Chapter 3, Breaking the Cycle. And it seems like the way that you introduced this chapter was asking where the USA is in this cycle. So the trade-offs of divisibility and portability versus control,
uncontrollability and supply stability. So that's kind of the historical cycle, which is that people have selected gold as the best money from the natural world. Like, if you try to think of something from the natural world that scores better in these 8 properties than gold, you're not going to be able to do it. People pick the best tools that are available for the job, and that's why gold was picked, because it was the best money from the natural world. If you think that you can come up with a money from the natural world that's better than gold, that was historically available, chances are something is wrong with your analysis, or you're just smarter than everyone else before you. So yeah, gold selected as the best money from the natural world, but there's problems. So governments create paper money backed by gold, but then it's no longer backed by gold, and you get hyperinflation, and then people are like, crap, I need some way to save my wealth. So then they turn back to gold. And that's been a repeating cycle in many different countries around the world for centuries now. So the question is like, yeah, where are we in this cycle right now over here in the United States? And is there any way to stop this destructive cycle of going back and forth between gold and paper money? And we'll get to the fix in a moment. But right now, in that cycle, it's pretty clear where we are. So already, we've broken the link between dollars and gold. That happened in 1971, so 51 years ago. And so now we're at the stage where what should happen next in this cycle is that more and more money will be printed until we get into hyperinflation. And you can kind of, it's debatable how soon that will occur. But it's not looking good from my perspective, because essentially you have a government that is in a huge amount of debt. And in order to pay the interest on that debt, they either need to keep raising taxes and we need to be more and more productive. Our GDP needs to grow to keep up, which we've not been on pace to do. Or you need to start printing more money to help service that debt. And that's what we are doing.
When you say service that debt, so there's a moment you mentioned in Chapter 3, as debt grows, interest rates must fall to remain payable. And so what the Federal Reserve does is really a small amount, though complex, a small amount of decisions, and that's printing more money, fluctuating interest rates, and I think
those are the main tools.
Those are the main 2 tools that they use. And so when they're printing more money, interest rates are going up.
So interest rates can vary separately from money printing. But yeah, essentially, if your debt is continuing to grow, but you only have a specific amount of income to pay the interest on that debt, then if your interest rate is higher, then you might not be able to pay it.
Yeah, the amount of money with that specific interest rate as the total amount of debt's growing is harder, more difficult to pay back. So that's why they have to keep interest rates from going, or they have to lower interest rates so that it's payable.
Yeah, so our income is our GDP, basically. So if your GDP was kind of keeping up, then maybe you wouldn't have to do that.
Yeah.
But it's not. Spoiler alert. We do need to create additional money to help pay that debt. And the debt, to be clear, we're paying the interest on the debt. We're not paying off the debt. The debt itself is continuing to skyrocket. And it's basically a certainty we'll never be able to pay off the debt itself. It's simply the interest on that debt that we're now at a point where it's like, if we don't print more money, you're not going to be able to pay the interest, and then that would be a default. And the United States government cannot default, so therefore they're forced to print more money. We're at a point where interest rates had been continually falling. The ceiling on them was falling for a long period of time, many decades now. Interestingly, interest rates have come up and actually gone up farther than their previous ceiling, but we're also seeing a lot of financial strife in the economy, and so just this next few months are going to be really interesting to kind of see how that plays out, because interest rates really shouldn't be able to get much higher without a lot of stress on the government paying back debt. And they may be forced to lower interest rates and essentially print more money. And then you're back at the inflation issue that you were trying to solve by raising rates.
And as I've heard from Parker, I've heard from other people in the Bitcoin space, there's no other option. They don't really have any control on stopping either fluctuating interest rates or printing more money, which is scary to think about, because what does that result? So if they were to stop doing that, the monetary system would tweak or break in some way.
It would collapse.
It would collapse. But if we keep doing what we're doing, it would collapse. Or not collapse. Well, I think, it would.
Essentially, the system is screwed.
Yeah.
Because you only have two outcomes here. One is that you either don't print more money and just get eaten alive by the debt, and you go into like the worst Great Depression that the world has ever seen. And this would be global because the economy is global at this point. That would be, very unpopular for politicians. And so it's very unlikely that will be what happens. The only other alternative is to continue to print money at a faster and faster rate until we essentially are at hyperinflation, which is another form of collapse. Yep. I guess there is a third option, which would be if by some miracle for the next 50 years, we can increase GDP faster than we ever have before to be able to pay off the debt that way, but that's not really a realistic option.
Yeah. Yeah, it's concerning for sure. And there seems to be this bright signal of hope.
You want to get into that next?
Yeah. So Chapter 4, Valuing Bitcoin. You display the total market share in trillions of dollars.
Well, before we get there, probably just offering Bitcoin as a solution to break the cycle, and talking about the 8 properties, those 8 monetary properties, and how Bitcoin would be scored for them. And then, right after that, we can talk about like how valuable could Bitcoin become. But going back to those 8 properties real quick, right? Fungibility, 1 Bitcoin for 1 Bitcoin. Bitcoin is fungible. There's not much of an issue there. Just some technical concerns that are being worked out. Durability. Bitcoin is it's a technology that lives, in computers and on the internet. And people who aren't technical, might have some issue with really feeling that the durability is reliable. And Bitcoin really only has had 14 years or so to prove itself. So I understand that. But in those 14 years, it has a really good track record. So nobody has ever lost Bitcoin because of a flaw with the way Bitcoin works, the Bitcoin protocol. It's all been human error. So people that have lost their own keys that they were supposed to keep track of, or they shared information that they shouldn't have. So yeah, you do need to kind of learn and become knowledgeable about how to use Bitcoin to safely use it. But still, Bitcoin itself and the protocol that it runs on are quite durable, and it should continue to prove itself there over time. Portability, Bitcoin's digital. It's very portable. So that scores great there.
Yeah, there's a great video. I saw Jack Mallers, and I mean, I've seen tons of other videos. CoinKite had a video as well, just showing how quickly from 4 different people they did the video. The cinematography was from above, so you could see them scanning QR codes, transferring over Bitcoin in an instant. And Jack Mahler's video was showing from the US and New York, or maybe it was Chicago, transferring to some country in Europe, and how quickly it transferred with little fees, very, very little fees. So portability is definitely pretty high score.
Yeah, so it does come down to that difference between portability and transferability as those two properties, though. I would say that, it's easy to take your Bitcoin when you go somewhere because it basically just lives on the internet. It's everywhere at once. So yeah, it's like perfectly portable. Transferability, though, there are some concerns because if I wanted to pay someone and they didn't have internet access, maybe they're in a poor section of the world or something, Bitcoin is much less useful there. And then also, if you're sending a standard Bitcoin transaction, it can take 10 minutes. It could take longer to fully confirm. That's why the Lightning Network and Layer 2 solutions are really needed for Bitcoin to scale and be sufficiently transferable.
Yeah, and so for having it be sufficiently transferable from maybe from the US to Venezuela, the reason why that transferability would mark as a poor score is because exchanging the Venezuelan Bolivar, I believe is the name of their currency, for Bitcoin. I mean, the Bolivar is an inferior currency. It's worth much less than the US dollar. So being able to have that exchange rate, it's somewhat difficult right now.
Right. Yeah. So transferability, that's going to be an important one to put a magnifying glass when we start comparing Bitcoin to other cryptocurrencies in a few minutes. But yeah, transferability scores pretty well, I would say. Still, it's going to continue to score better over time as more and more technology gets fleshed out and built on top of Bitcoin. Divisibility, Bitcoin, for those who don't know, one Bitcoin can be divided into 100 million Satoshis. So you can buy a fraction of a Bitcoin. You don't need to have $15,000 or whatever to get some Bitcoin.
Yeah, as you can see here too, the block clock showing 5,936 sats per US dollar.
Nice. Yeah. So
$1 will get you 5,936 sats.
Right.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah, it definitely is, as we'll talk about more soon as well. Uncontrollability, this is very interesting. So this is, I think I mentioned this earlier. Bitcoin is the first time that you can have digital property that also isn't centralized and is scarce. So Bitcoin actually scores very, very well on uncontrollability as long as you don't keep your coins at an exchange or something. If you don't have a custodian controlling your coins, and you control your coins, then it's very hard for anyone else to control your coins. Supply stability. This one is a phenomenal aspect to what makes Bitcoin so important as well. There's only 21 million Bitcoin. That number will never be increased. And we might touch on that a little later as to why. But that means it scores even better than gold. So from the natural world, we had gold as a solution for something that's hard to produce more of. Bitcoin surpasses gold there as well. So the last one, demand stability. Bitcoin right now scores pretty poorly in that because a lot of people have not adopted Bitcoin and they don't want to accept Bitcoin as payment. But as I touched on earlier, demand stability should rely on the previous 7. So as more and more people recognize that as a monetary tool, Bitcoin is something new and it's something that competes with these other 2 forms of money that we've been using for the past few centuries, and it actually tends to score better in pretty much all of those properties, or at least it will be expected to in all of them, then it should be more and more acceptable as a form of money. And the demand for it should stabilize and we'll get much less volatility. So at this point, we're kind of at that valuing Bitcoin part of chapter 4. And this part I think is really exciting. This is where I go over like 2 different ways for trying to talk about like how valuable could Bitcoin be in the future.
Yeah, I didn't put the actual fiscal amounts. I do have the per coin amount that after showing how if Bitcoin were to absorb market share of real estate, narrow and broad money, which we can get into what the difference is of those 2 categories of money, stocks and debt. I think those are the 5 that are mentioned. I mean, real estate, narrow and broad money, all of these are just, it's in the hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of market share right now.
Yeah. So when we're talking about market share, it's like how much money is there in the world? And if Bitcoin becomes the most popular money in the world, then like what is the room that it has to grow into? So right now, the market cap of Bitcoin, which is like if you add up all of the Bitcoin out there and their value and you put it all together, it's like between $250 and $500 billion worth of value right now. Now, how that's actually, it sounds like a lot, but it's pretty small because if you look at gold, it's actually like over 10 trillion,
10, yep.
or about 10 trillion.
Yep.
Yeah. When you look at just other forms of paper money, government money, I should say, both paper and coins, as well as like bank deposits and stuff, then I think it's like 35 trillion worth of value there. $35 trillion if you convert it all into dollars. And then you've also got like, and that would be called broad money, I think, or maybe I have it backwards, but what I'm going to call narrow money, which is the money that is harder to get to. That's like in savings accounts and time deposits and stuff like that. That's another, I think it's like 60 trillion or something. And these numbers are subject to change. Like they could be different tomorrow, but essentially, yeah, you add up all of the actual current monetary tools together and you get over $100 trillion of value. So if Bitcoin's only $250 to $500 billion, you can see that if it kind of replaced all of those other forms of money, then it's gonna essentially the value of one Bitcoin is going to increase by over 100x. Even if it just got to match gold, it would be 20 or 25 times its current value. So that's exciting, but you also need to be kind of aware of like how likely that is to happen, right? You want a positive expected value if you're going to make a bet. So that means that, even if the potential reward is 100x, then you need to believe that there's a higher than 1% chance of that happening. So you do need to have some conviction in Bitcoin before you just start piling money into it, because there's You need a positive expected value on the bet. And then I could move on to talking about my preferred form of actually trying to value Bitcoin, because I mentioned there's two different ways. This is like the addressable market way, but then there's also the Bitcoin as insurance approach, which talks about Gresham's law.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
did you want to head there next?
Sure. Yep.
Okay. So another crucial aspect to when you're imagining how valuable Bitcoin could be in the future. So far, we've kind of been measuring things in dollars, but that's problematic, because if I say that gold's market capitalization is 10 trillion, if we print a bunch of money in the next 5 years, then now it's not 10 trillion anymore. It's different. Mm-hmm. So using dollars as a measurement of value is not necessarily good. So there's a powerful quote that I like a lot that says, there is no ceiling on the price of Bitcoin because there's no floor on the price of $1. So if dollars go into hyperinflation, then the price of everything in dollars is going to skyrocket. Mm-hmm. So if more and more people start getting rid of dollars in favor of Bitcoin because they recognize that Bitcoin has superior monetary properties, that actually speeds up hyperinflation, because you just have more and more dollars that people are trying to push away from themselves and just throw out into the supply of everyone else, mm-hmm. so that they can store their own wealth in Bitcoin. And so if you look at it that way, it's much harder to look at Bitcoin as a typical investment. Most investments, if you're investing in the stock market or something, most people enter that investment with the framework in place that they are trying to make more dollars. So they're trying to either sell that stock later for a higher price and get more dollars. But for Bitcoin, what you're essentially trying to do is protect yourself from hyperinflation. So it doesn't really make sense if your Bitcoin is going up in its dollar value to then sell it back for dollars, because then if you want to protect your wealth, you would just have to take those dollars and put it back into Bitcoin. Yeah. So rather than looking at it as a way to acquire more dollars, it should be looked at as insurance. And so the question is how much insurance do people need? And the answer right now is not much, because you can just really do some very simple math. There are 21 million Bitcoin that will ever exist. Right now, there's 5.5 billion adults in the world.
Adults.
Okay. 8 billion people, but mm-hmm. I'm assuming that 5-year-olds don't have much wealth to convert into Bitcoin.
You never know, man. There could be some studs out there, some stud 5-year-olds.
Yeah. So they're a factor. I mean, kids have some money too, but just looking at the adults, you got 5.5 billion. So simple division, right? 21 million divided by 5.5 billion people. That means that there's only 0.004 Bitcoin per adult on planet Earth. So if you want to get your share of that, that's all you need, 0.004. Now, that's actually pretty conservative too, because when I say 21 million Bitcoin, there's actually been 2 million plus Bitcoin that is suspected to be lost forever, because people weren't very careful with Bitcoin when it wasn't worth anything in the early days. So really, it's more like 19 million or even less. Is
that including Satoshi's stack as well?
I'm not sure. I know that different people estimate anywhere from 1.5 million lost to 4 million lost, and I think some of those numbers may include Satoshi's coins. Mm-hmm. But either way, it's a substantial number that lowers the amount of Bitcoin that can go around for everyone else.
For people that are new to the Bitcoin space, if you're listening, Satoshi Nakamoto was the individual or individuals that released the white paper for Bitcoin and released this open source software network. So they released the Genesis block, which I believe is that it's 1 million total Bitcoin.
So Satoshi is suspected to have mined so many blocks that he probably has about 1 million Bitcoin
Total. Okay, gotcha. So the all the blocks that he mined to maintain the Bitcoin network over the first year, 2 years, when Bitcoin was really not in the eyes of many people.
Yeah.
Besides the cypherpunk list of people that he emailed, all the blocks that he mined in that short amount of time, the very beginning phases, amounted to 1 million, close to 1 million Bitcoin, which has not moved since then.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Some people think Satoshi has passed away and it was an individual, but no one really knows. It's anonymous.
mhm.
So yeah, so I did 21 million divided by 5.5 billion, but you could probably do 19 million
Mhm.
divided by 5.5 billion people. And then even a bigger factor potentially is that so far we're just looking at individual people that want a piece of the pie, the Bitcoin pie. But there's probably governments and huge corporations that would want a very large slice of that pie too. So
Mhm.
the amount that's left for individual people is even less than
Yeah.
that.
Oh, yeah.
So what I tell my friends and family is that if you can get 0.01 Bitcoin, which is more than the 0.004 Bitcoin that I said earlier, which was already conservative, but if you can get 0.01 0.01 Bitcoin, which is 1 million Satoshis, then you should be more than insured for the event that hyper Bitcoinization happens, which means that Bitcoin essentially takes over as the most popular global money on earth. And how much does 1 million Satoshis cost? Well, right now it costs like less than $200. So you spend $200 on Bitcoin and you are insured completely for that event. So even if you think it's like not likely to happen, if you are stuck in the mindset that government money will continue to be the most popular money in the world and Bitcoin is not going to be successful, or it's very, very low chance of it, like what's the harm in getting just $200 of Bitcoin, trying to put it into your own custody so that you don't lose it, and then you're safe from the fact that your dollars can basically go to zero value through hyperinflation.
Yeah, I really like how you broke that down and provided people with this conservative number of the amount of sats that they can just keep in their own custody solution, in their own custody, holding their own keys, and showing that it's just a small amount that you need. You don't need to keep. I mean, the ethos is stacking sats, stay humble, and a lot of people dollar cost average nowadays because they've realized. I mean, if we're going to get into Gresham's law here, which I believe is no one essentially desires inferior money, and so as you go down the proverbial Bitcoin rabbit hole, you do all this studying of Austrian economics, the history of money, the properties that we've just discussed of money, and as a technology, you do all this due diligence and just spend 100+ hours of just understanding all these revolving topics. You realize that the probability more and more seems to be going up of whether Bitcoin will succeed, of being the medium of exchange on a global scale. So yeah, some people are just on a Bitcoin standard. Got Sahel, who's on zero. Shout out to Sahel. And yeah, I mean, El Salvador is the first country that has made it a medium of exchange. And they are teaching this to their younger generations. I believe 2 of our members, Tyler Campbell, David
Layton, yeah.
David Layton, went to El Salvador to be involved with that whole movement of just providing education on these complex concepts within, Bitcoin's, within the Bitcoin space. And so, that's a huge move too. I mean, we all saw that at the 2021 Miami Bitcoin conference, that announcement, and that's huge. I mean, for a whole nation to proclaim that Bitcoin will be their new medium of exchange, and they're still persistently doing it. They're encouraging society in El Salvador to use this. So that really brings up the probability of this, and then if you study game theory too, that's another whole topic of just understanding that. And you can, if you want to get into this, we can. If you understand that no one's going to desire using an inferior form of technology if one nation starts to adopt it, and in the geopolitical arena, if you want to compete with other nations and countries, you're going to want to potentially hold on to this to store your value, to your GDP that you're making as a country. And so if you don't do it, if you're the last country to do it, you're going to be the weakest country, because there's other countries that will have much more Bitcoin and capabilities of expanding their economy.
Yeah, Bitcoin adoption is happening rapidly around the world, and the reason for that is Gresham's law. So Gresham's law, like you stated, it's essentially that if people have a choice, they'll always want to hold hold a superior money and get rid of an inferior money. So just as an example, like if I gave you, the listener, if I gave you $100 US, and then I also gave you $100 worth of Venezuelan bolivar, so you have $200 worth of value in these two different forms of money, and then there was a store that accepted either one as payment, you're going to be incentivized to hold on to your dollars and pay in Venezuelan bolivar, because you want to get rid of the inferior money. So you're going to always pay in that one. So that, it goes back to looking at money as a tool. People like using the best tool for the job. And they want to get rid of the inferior tools. So same thing with Bitcoin. If Bitcoin is a better tool than dollars, more and more people are going to make the choice just naturally to store their wealth in Bitcoin and get rid of their dollars as much as they can. And so, we might see a fire sale on dollars, and we might see a much higher demand for Bitcoin that will push the Bitcoin price up. And it might mean that 1 million Satoshis that costs $200 now that you can get for your insurance, that might become a lot more expensive if the Bitcoin price goes up, and then it's harder to get your insurance. So, and then game theory, like this is why a lot of Bitcoiners view this as inevitable, because if we take for granted that Bitcoin is the best monetary tool, and then people are just naturally incentivized to move towards it, probably we're going to see a point at which these different rival nation states, one of them adopts Bitcoin and starts acquiring Bitcoin, and then it becomes a national security risk for the others to make sure that they have a piece of that pie as well. And you kind of get like an arms race or a space race amongst these different countries to try to really panic and get as much Bitcoin as they can. And probably, you have just civilians around the world that want to make sure they have their piece of their pie. And the next, I don't know, it's debatable how long that it will take for this to happen, but I'm of the opinion that Gresham's law is very powerful, and number go up is very powerful. People that have been just sitting at the sidelines watching Bitcoin increase in value continually are going to, have that fear of missing out or FOMO, and we are going to see a lot of unbelievable fireworks in probably the next 10 years or less.
Yeah, and that's the classic meme that I've seen plenty of times, but it was also in one of your chapters, one of your videos of two lines, and there's, the majority of people, I think it's all the people in the line that has a desk, someone sitting at the desk with 60K Bitcoin, and the other line, there's no one there, and it's like 15K or whatever. Right. And that's because throughout these up and down swings of the Bitcoin price in US dollar, as people see it going up in price, they do indeed have FOMO. They want to buy in, and then there's big players that potentially some whales just sell off a huge portion, and do whatever they're going to do. They're going to take those capital gains and invest in another way. But
and some people completely don't want to touch Bitcoin because in the media, Bitcoin is always either in a bubble or it's dead, right? You've either got Bitcoin has been, exploding in price upwards. And so it's like, oh my gosh, it's in a bubble. People buying it are stupid. And then the price does, correct and it goes down a lot. It has a huge drawdown and now Bitcoin's dead again for the 5th time.
Yeah.
What you just zoom out, right? You look at the Bitcoin price chart on a logarithmic scale, or you just look at the 200-week moving average of Bitcoin, and it's like a straight line upwards, right? You've got higher highs, you've got higher lows every cycle, and that's the important thing. So, is Bitcoin risky? If you need to move, if you need to trade your Bitcoin in for government money because you need to buy something in the short term, then yeah, Bitcoin could be risky if you need to sell it because some of these drawdowns last 2-3 years even, and they can be very severe. They can be 80% drawdowns.
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of in one right now.
Yep.
But anybody that has held Bitcoin for like 4 or 5 years has been massively rewarded from the underlying adoption. It's like the signal underlying the noise, which is that really drastic volatility. So yeah, Bitcoin as an investment is a multi-year time frame investment. And if you have trouble stomaching volatility, that's another reason why I think it's almost better to make sure you just have those million sats. Don't worry about putting so much more money into this. Like some people, kind of get greedy and they're like, oh, I'm a huge believer in Bitcoin. I'm going to just start funneling thousands of dollars into Bitcoin. But then the price goes down 80% and suddenly, they're freaking out, they're selling, and they've made a big mistake.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just get some as insurance, not financial advice, of course, I guess. But, I do recommend my friends and family to just have a small amount. It's actually more risky, I think, to have no Bitcoin than to have some Bitcoin, because just while the technology exists, and it is for the first time in human history, a form of money that competes with the previous best forms of money, which are paper and gold. While this technology exists, it is a risk to only have your money in those older forms of money.
Yeah, well said. And on the topic of game theory, I think this would be nice to transition into the final chapter 5, other cryptocurrencies. Because I do believe that is a big part of game theory. Other people might speculate on, well, why can't Bitcoin be copied? Because it can, the code can be copied. So what's stopping it from, being compete, or there's another cryptocurrency that could be competitive. And, there's a lot of, I just talked to someone today, and very smart guy. He's been in the investment, I would say, venture capitalist industry. And, there's many people like him that enjoy diversifying into Solana or Ethereum or all these other cryptocurrencies.
Right.
And this is one of the biggest time consumption topics for me when it comes to explaining to other people. Because for the most part, people are so used to the mental model of diversification into real estate, into stocks, into bonds, into all these different, to gold, whatever it may be. And every financial advisor for a pretty long time has stated you should not put all of your eggs in one basket. But what we are doing is that exact thing. We're putting, for the most part, we're putting a good amount of our eggs in the same basket, which is Bitcoin. And yeah, a lot of people are skeptical in the conversations that I have. They get into, well, if you can just copy the code, why wouldn't everybody just how is that stopping Bitcoin from being dead?
Right.
And so that was actually, it took me a little bit to really understand that. And I think there's something that I've heard alongside that is the monetary properties. So the amount of capital that's invested, the amount of Bitcoin miners that are, tied to this specific protocol instead of Bitcoin Cash.
Right. So you can copy the Bitcoin code as much as you want. You can even copy it and make changes, but what you can't copy is the network. So like it's kind of similar. You can copy Facebook. You can copy Twitter.
When you say network, it's like the Bitcoin network is always, right. Some people might think this is the open source protocol, but it's also the individuals, the actual people that are running nodes, the actual businesses that are running the miners.
Yeah, it's the network of users. It's the network of people who are running nodes. It's the network of energy and infrastructure that's built around Bitcoin. You can't copy that very easily. So it's similar to like if you tried to copy a big social media platform like Facebook or Twitter, you might be able to kind of replicate the website, but you can't replicate the number of people that are using it. You'd need to convince people to come over to yours somehow.
It's a great example.
Yeah. So the network effect is very powerful. I think along the same lines, a lot of the question that people have is that how reliable is the 21 million supply limit if you have all these other cryptocurrencies? Like if more like Dogecoin is created or more Bitcoin Cash or something, all these other cryptocurrencies, if more of them are created, then aren't you kind of getting around the supply cap of Bitcoin? The answer to that is definitely no. And the reason why is simply like, you've got gold and you've got all these other metals, right? It's like saying gold is not scarce because there's so much iron and copper out there. It's like these are two totally different things, and the supply of copper has nothing to do with the supply of gold. And so they do need to be viewed as totally separate entities, each cryptocurrency. Another question that a lot of people have is you've got 10,000 other cryptocurrencies out there. Some of them are very popular. Could any of them be a better money or a better monetary tool than Bitcoin is? And could they be the one that actually takes over the world as the most popular money? The answer is yes, they could. However, in order to do so, they would have to have better properties among those 8 properties. So let's break that down. Let's talk about like Bitcoin versus other crypto according to those 8 desirable properties of money. So for fungibility, most other crypto is pretty fungible. You can design other crypto to be pretty fungible. So it's very similar to Bitcoin in that area. For durability, Bitcoin is the most durable cryptocurrency out of all 10,000. It was here first. It's had the most eyes monitoring its code for any bugs. It's also pretty simple code compared to a lot of other cryptocurrencies that are more complex because they're trying to do other things, but that's also a vulnerability. It's also more durable for a few other reasons, like the amount of energy that is being used to protect it and the amount of nodes that are being run by so many other people. But we'll probably talk about that more in just a minute. Moving on to portability.
One question.
Okay.
Do you have the ability to describe how, so Solana has been DDoS attacked a couple times, I believe. What's stopping, do you have an answer for that? What's stopping Bitcoin from being DDoSed?
I'm not too familiar with the nature of the attack on Solana. I know that Bitcoin can't be, and the evidence of that is that it hasn't been.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I'm not too familiar with the nature of that attack. To answer that.
I've seen some explanations and breakdowns of why Bitcoin can't be, but I would have to kind of recap on my knowledge on that, but I just want to see if you.
I mean, if I had to take a guess, I would imagine that if you want to try to overload nodes with information, that would involve a lot of like transaction sending, and there's fees involved with that, so it'd be very expensive.
Mhm.
But I don't know. That's just my guess.
Okay. Well, anyways, on to the next property.
Yeah. So, Bitcoin is the most durable, but we're moving on to portability. Most crypto is portable. It's similar to Bitcoin there. So, no issue with portability. For transferability, that one is the most complicated one. And I think we want to save transferability for after we cover this list of 8.
Okay.
Divisibility, again, these are digital tokens. They can be designed to be very divisible. So in the areas of fungibility, portability, and divisibility, all crypto is effectively the same. Uncontrollability, though, that's a big one, right? Bitcoin is decentralized, and that's what gives it that uncontrollability. It is essentially provable that all other cryptocurrencies are less decentralized than Bitcoin. And we can talk about why for that in a minute too. But by extension, it means that all other cryptocurrency is less uncontrollable, or without the double negative, is more controllable than Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Supply stability. A lot of cryptocurrencies don't even have a supply limit like Bitcoin does with 21 million. Some cryptocurrencies do. They try to put a supply limit. But the issue is, because they're less decentralized and because they are more controllable, that means that the chances of that supply limit ever being adjusted to be higher is higher. That danger is greater for every other cryptocurrency. So the actual supply stability that you can rely on is more reliable for Bitcoin than any other token.
Yeah, and there's like a track record. There's a historical there's history of human behavior just showing that because of absolute power corrupting, there's a high probability that in due time, the option to increase or manipulate the supply is very high. That probability is very high. It's happened countless times. And so if that is a property within any of these altcoins, then it should just be turned away.
Yeah, if protection and security and stability is your number one concern, as it is for most people when it comes to their money, your only option is Bitcoin as far as having the highest degree of those aspects. Mm-hmm. Then the 8th property, again, demand stability, relies on the previous 7, but basically the demand stability for every other crypto is also worse than Bitcoin because supply stability, uncontrollability, and durability for all of them are worse. Mm-hmm. And you can notice that for none of the properties did I say other cryptocurrencies are better than Bitcoin. So they could be similar as they are in 3 of the properties. They can be worse as they are in 4 of the properties. And then the only complicated one is transferability, which we can get into next here if you want.
Yep.
Okay. So transferability, I mentioned earlier, for a standard Bitcoin transaction, it can take 10 minutes. It can take longer than that for your transaction to confirm. That's not convenient if you're trying to pay for groceries, right? The solution for that on Bitcoin is a second layer. It could be Lightning. It could be something else. But it's something that's built on top of the foundational protocol. Other cryptocurrencies love to brag about their transaction throughput, saying that, we can process transactions very quickly in the matter of seconds, and there's no need for a second layer. What they don't tell you is the trade-off that they're making. So that's, you've got these cryptos with these marketing teams that say, hey, our stuff is decentralized too, which it's not compared to Bitcoin. And they also say that it's way faster than Bitcoin. It's way more efficient than Bitcoin, blah, blah, blah. what needs to be understood is what a node is. And this is where my presentation in that video starts to get a little bit more technical, but it should be understandable for most people, which is that how the Bitcoin network actually runs is just a lot of people are running computer programs with the Bitcoin protocol around the world, and those are called nodes. That's what makes it decentralized. So there's not just one computer sitting at Chase Bank or something that's monitoring everyone's transactions. You've got computers around the world being run by anybody. You can run a node. Anybody can run a node because they're very, very cheap.
Yeah, we just had Matt, I believe his name is Matt Hill. I'm sorry if I said your name wrong, but he is the founder, CEO of Start9 Labs. There's also Ronin Dojo. I myself run a Tonto node, and it's plug and play. It's a little pricey, but it's worth the investment. And all you have to do, it's like plugging into your Wi-Fi. You do have to download, the IBD, the initial block download, which takes a little bit. And there's a few things that you'd have to do that's somewhat technical, but overall, it's pretty damn easy. And this is going to be the future of offering nodes and incentivizing people to want to run nodes. And the whole thing with Matt, I'm kind of digressing here, but with Matt Hill is people that you family members, mothers, fathers, even businesses, they want to begin to own their own data. They don't want Facebook. They don't want Instagram. They don't want all these huge companies surveilling everything, all of your photos, all of your private photos of your children. And so there's this erupting changing of hosting your own data, having your own data. So incorporating that into a plug and play node, being able to have like Nextcloud and having all of your memories of your children, but it's it's secure. That's a huge incentive. I look forward to seeing that expansion of this trend.
Yeah, and along those lines, running a Bitcoin node allows you to host the blockchain yourself. The reason for doing that is not just to be like charitable to the network. That's not the reason you have 100,000 people around the world running Bitcoin nodes. It's because if you're a little paranoid, you can run your own node and verify your transactions like using your own hardware rather than having to trust a different node in the network that is connecting to the network and just telling you that your transaction is there. You can verify it yourself. So Bitcoin, don't trust, verify. Running a node is a good way to do that. But yeah, the requirements to run a node are not very high for Bitcoin. You've got a lot of people have the equipment already at their home. You basically just need a decent computer with 1 terabyte of memory. And if you don't have a terabyte of memory, you can get a SSD and it's like $100 and it's going to get cheaper with time. And so, yeah, if you're starting from scratch, just a few $100, you can run a node and its life will be long and it can serve you for your Bitcoin needs. But the reason why you only need a terabyte memory and a simple laptop, even an old laptop, is because Bitcoin processes each block in the blockchain, which is a block just contains the latest transactions. Each block is 2 megabytes or less of data, pretty much. And each block gets mined approximately every 10 minutes on average. So what these other cryptocurrencies are doing is that they are increasing the block sizes to be larger than 2 megabytes, and they are potentially processing them more often than every 10 minutes. And so that's what gives you the faster transaction throughput. But at the same time, you're making it very hard for people to run their own nodes. So, if you have this massive transaction throughput, it might take a very high-end computer to run a node, or maybe you can't even do it. Maybe you need a data center. So what these cryptocurrencies are doing is they're essentially becoming PayPal or Visa, where, it's more and more centralized. A lot of these cryptos claim to be decentralized, but there's only 12 nodes in the whole world and they're all in data centers. It's that's not decentralized to me. And, I can't run my own node to verify my own transactions. I have to trust one of these data centers. So that's what makes Bitcoin the most decentralized out of all the cryptocurrencies. There's more people in the world running Bitcoin nodes than any other cryptocurrency, and that's not likely to change. It's not even close.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I remember seeing Vitalik, the creator of Ethereum, state that you would need to run, like your node would have to be able to handle 800 gigabytes or something pretty large per month. So you would have to buy a new SSD hard drive every single month, which they're not that cheap right now. They will get cheaper, but to be able to do that every single month to run.
Yeah, Ethereum is a great example. It's like the second biggest cryptocurrency by market capitalization, but already regular people cannot, really run a full Ethereum node like you can easily with Bitcoin. So, Bitcoin is the most decentralized. That means its supply limit is the most reliable, and it's one of the aspects of why Bitcoin is the most durable. A lot would have to change for Bitcoin to not be on top when it comes to the best monetary tool. It's in my mind, it's effectively impossible for another cryptocurrency to replace Bitcoin as the best monetary tool. The question is just whether other cryptocurrencies could be useful for something other than money. And I don't really know the answer to that, maybe, but Bitcoin has no competitors when it comes to the best digital monetary asset. And if some of these other cryptocurrencies might be useful for other things, chances are they're going to have a lot of competition with each other. Mm-hmm. So just again, from like an investment perspective, if you're buying Bitcoin, like nothing competes with it in the area that it's trying to succeed in. Whereas if you invest in these other things, you're going to have a lot of losers that are competing with other ones, and they're all centralized compared to Bitcoin. And I have a hard time seeing major corporations or governments really adopting something like Ethereum when that means they have to put their trust in someone like Vitalik. You have to put your trust in like these certain leaders and organizations, whereas Bitcoin has no leader, it has no CEO, it has no ruling class. It is just decentralized money for the people.
Yeah. I think eventually I'm going to do a specific episode that focuses on proof of stake to really understand it. There's a Substack article that was written, and it's, I believe, titled, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't know the exact title, but it was like a story on proof of stake for Bitcoin maxis. And I've got it in a tab on my computer because I still haven't read it, but I want to. So I might try to get that guy on because I've heard a lot of praise towards explaining proof of stake. And the recent merge too, understanding, it seems that everybody is, it seems that proof of stake now, with this new merge, has enabled the majority of validators, 60% or so, to be OFAC compliant.
Yeah, I think it's higher than that.
It's even higher than that. So what that means is like some of the validators, maybe Coinbase.
Yeah, definitely Coinbase.
It's definitely Coinbase and other crypto exchanges. They just are able to, if the U.S. government or some agency stated that this transaction is not OFAC compliant, or they don't like this transaction because it's coming from some domestic terrorist or whatever it may be, Coinbase could just say, okay, and not include and essentially censor that transaction and stopping that transaction from being throughput, from being actually sent from one peer to another. And so that's defeating the entire purpose of what Bitcoin's solving. And Ethereum is the biggest. It's the second biggest, most well-known, most popular crypto out there. And
it's
people don't understand this still to this day.
Right.
And the developers, I don't think they do either.
Yeah, there's just a ton of obvious problems with Ethereum. Like if you wanted to be a validator yourself, I think the requirement is like you have to have 32 ETH. So that's already like a cost barrier. But not only that, like regardless of how Ethereum works today, the main problem is that we don't know how Ethereum's going to work 5 years from now or 10 years from now. We have no idea. Like 5 years ago, Ethereum was completely different than it is today. And there's a small group of people that kind of make those decisions. So we don't know what the supply of Ethereum is going to be 5 years from now. In fact, I don't think you can even audit the supply of Ethereum right now.
Yeah.
And like, if you want certainty, which is something you probably do want with your money, Bitcoin's gives you the most certainty. We do know what Bitcoin is going to look like 5, 10, 15, 100 years from now. We know what the supply is going to be. We can audit the supply today. We can know what the supply will very closely approximately be 100 years from now. And it's just going to keep getting closer to that 21 million until year 2140, where all the Bitcoin is mined. So yeah, certainty and protection. If you want to own digital assets, there's only one place to go. It's Bitcoin.
Yeah, and you were saying how some corporations and governments, they're not going to want to hold Ethereum just because of this, of what we're describing. I recently saw that Shell gas company is going to be making an announcement at the next Miami conference in 2023. That's huge. That's pretty, I mean, depending on what they decide on what they're doing.
Yeah, I didn't really get that. It's like an announcement about an announcement, but it sounded like the announcement already was that they're getting into Bitcoin mining, which is kind of
it. But I think it's for Bitcoin Magazine to get the attention for the Miami conference and for people to buy tickets. It's still pretty cool. It's a really huge step forward that a massive company like Shell is going to be getting into Bitcoin mining. The inner Odell within me begins to question what are the risks of that. So for a very, very powerful, wealthy corporation investing in Bitcoin miners, maybe having the majority of miners, it could potentially not be as decentralized. But I think that going back to like beginning of, was it this year, maybe last year, where China banned all Bitcoin mining and 60% of the hash rate was completely shut off from the network.
Around there, yeah.
I think it was around 60%, which is the biggest drop that we've ever seen in the network. Block by block continued.
And now we're at all-time highs again for hash rate. So a lot of those miners moved to America, moved to some other countries where there's cheap energy.
That's the huge part, is that was like the biggest FUD point of, fear, uncertainty, despair. That was a huge
doubt.
Or doubt. It could be either one. That was a huge one. The fact that China had a very large portion of the network's hash rate.
Yeah.
And when that happened, when they exported all of, which is just so crazy to me that they did that. But
they're going to have to reverse that decision too.
I think they already have. I think there's more hash rate in China already.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, like, again, from like that geopolitical game theory, like if all these other countries are starting to scoop up the scarcest asset on planet Earth, you don't want to be left behind.
But the beauty of that, just to go back to Shell and the decentralization of miners, is that all of their miners that were in China went to the US, went to Kazakhstan, I think maybe Russia, went to many different countries. Mm-hmm. So it made the location of miners less centralized. So
yeah, I think United States now is in the top. It's in first place for the most Bitcoin mining. But yeah, more and more individual people can run their own mining machines to further decentralize it. So I definitely encourage that. And then you can point to these different mining pools and kind of have control distributed that way a bit. So yeah, I don't think there's a concern in the near future of that.
Listen, in the beginning of this podcast, I called you the UTXO Slayer. It seems to be the nickname for you nowadays. Who deemed that on you? Is that Phil?
I can't remember. It might have been Carl, or it might have been Tyler. I might have come up with it. I don't remember, but
yeah,
it might have been Tyler actually. But anyway, yeah, the reason for that is that I help people manage their UTXO. So just on a high level, if you hold Bitcoin in self-custody, eventually you should graduate into learning about UTXO so that you can kind of have a little bit more of a hands-on approach with your money.
Which stands for unspent transaction output.
Yeah, which also sounds frightening and technical, but
yeah, to the average person.
Yeah, all a UTXO is like it's a piece of Bitcoin. It's a coin of Bitcoin. So if you deposit Bitcoin into your own personal wallet, maybe you have an exchange send you some Bitcoin that you bought, then that enters your wallet as a UTXO worth that amount. And then if you receive another chunk of Bitcoin from the same place or from anywhere, now you have 2 UTXOs worth those individual amounts. So effectively, like let's say you have 5 Bitcoin, it could exist in just one UTXO worth 5 Bitcoin, or it could exist in 16 UTXOs of all varying different sizes that add up to 5 Bitcoin. So essentially, the reason why that's important, why that distinguishment is important, is that the more UTXOs you have, the more ability you kind of have to control your privacy, but also the more expensive it is to move the Bitcoin just from the transaction fees for a standard like on-chain transaction. So, yeah, that's part of what I do is I help clients think about what they want to do because there's no right answer to it.
And so you created that 3-part series, the blog series on Unchained to talk about UTXO consolidation and just what UTXOs are. And I've watched you reach out to clients to let them know, because if you do have your Bitcoin on Coinbase, on an exchange, get it off, but you don't have to pay attention to this caretaking procedure of UTXOs, because Coinbase and all these other businesses are doing that for you. But for clients that are at Unchained or they have their own, setup, they do have to be mindful of this. They have to, if they're dollar cost averaging, it may be every week. They could be every single day, putting some money into Bitcoin and then putting it into their Unchained vaults or whatever custody solution that they have. And that adds up to a lot of UTXOs. And then if you're going to spend, let's say you have 30 or 40 UTXOs, that's a lot of data, because essentially what Bitcoin is just data on this alphanumeric.
Yeah, chunks of data, yep.
Yeah, addresses. And so when you have your device, whatever you're signing with, it's a lot of data that it's signing. And there are some devices that at times are not able to sign on that big of a transaction. But even if they can, you could be paying a hefty transaction fee.
Right.
Like up to, what's the largest fee you've seen in your time?
So just like looking at the blockchain, you can see that back when there was a high demand for sending a lot of Bitcoin around, and fee rates were increasing as a result because people are trying to outbid each other to get their transaction processed in the next block. So like looking back at April of 2021, you had people that had a lot of UTXOs and they needed to move them during that high fee rate. And they were paying like over $1,000 or $2,000 worth of Bitcoin just to send their Bitcoin to a new address. So,
wow.
There's things that you can do to kind of get ahead of that. You can consolidate UTXOs by just grabbing a bunch of your UTXOs and sending it back to yourself. So you have the same amount of Bitcoin minus a little bit of fees, but now it's just in one UTXO. So if you had to move it during higher fee rates, it would cost you less. But I think a lot of this does probably sound intimidating to someone who's new to Bitcoin. The most important thing is that this is not really something you have to know. So,
well, what I was gonna have you introduce is the major. What I found was a great way of portraying this to someone that might be intimidated is the way that you laid it out in part 1 of your article series, which was the piggy bank analogy.
Yeah.
Showing how when we all have piggy banks, we'll put in quarters or $1 bills or $2 bills, whatever, 5, 10, hundreds.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what you're doing with, if you have this address, a multi-signature address or whatever it may be, and you keep depositing UTXOs with specific amounts of Satoshis. That's kind of it is a comparable situation.
Yeah. So I do like that analogy of like every time you put a new dollar bill in your piggy bank, now it exists separately as just a dollar. And the more you deposit, the more individual bills you have. Same thing with Bitcoin in self-custody. Some key points though is that no matter what you do, you're not going to lock yourself out of not being able to move your Bitcoin around. Yeah. Just might be you might need advice from someone who's a little more technical if you really like are depositing to your wallet every day for a year and you have a ridiculous amount of UTXOs. Might also be a bit more expensive. But bottom line is like most important thing is just get some Bitcoin to protect yourself from hyperinflation and put it in your own custody so that, no custodian can lose your Bitcoin and, graduate into learning about UTXOs at some point, but don't let that worry you and don't let that stop you from holding Bitcoin.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, Tom, thank you for joining. I really appreciate the conversation. And I would like for you to just shout out where people can find you, whether it's Twitter or anywhere else.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for having me on, Shane. My Twitter handle is just @Tom_Honzik. So my name. And I post, I make tweets whenever I come out with something new, an article or a video. So you can definitely find me there. And then I guess in the show notes, if you want to check out that video that we kind of loosely covered in this conversation, if you want to see those diagrams and stuff, if you're more of a visual person, definitely check out those videos.
Yeah, I'll note that in the show notes, man. But thanks again and peace out, everybody.